Today I'd like to talk about another anime from the 1980s. Today's anime? Giant Gorg. Sacred Giant Gorg is an adventure mecha series from the 1980s that takes influences from early Showa-era mecha like Tetsujin 28, or Gigantor as many of you may know it, and mixes that together with the 1960s action and adventure series like The Adventures of Johnny Quest and Tintin that we've all come to know and love. Set in the futuristic year of 1998, but airing in 1984, Giant Gorg is a classic show about a boy and his robot, and stars a diverse cast of characters, all centered around the titular robot, Giant Gorg. An entire 8 years before the series starts, a mysterious landmass in the Southern Ocean named Austral Island rises up from the seafloor overnight. Fearing whatever secrets it may hold, the superpowers of the world agree to wipe it off the world's maps and radars in order to hide it from the public until they can investigate this mysterious island further. Unfortunately for our main character's father, Dr. Tagami, whatever the island's secrets may be, he got way too close and was covertly assassinated by the American mega corporation Guile, who wants the island's secrets all for themselves. Voiced by Mayumi Tanaka, who you're probably familiar with as the voice of Luffy from One Piece, our main character is the 13-year-old Yu Tagami, son of the deceased Dr. Tagami. Not knowing why his father was killed, he makes a trip to America to meet the Woody Allen lookalike Dr. Wave, a colleague of his father's who just might hold a clue to his father's death. But no sooner do they get introduced, a gigantic wrecking ball owned by the Guile Corporation comes hurtling through Dr. Wave's apartment building, and from that point on, our main characters are suddenly running for their lives. While most of Giant Gorg takes place on Austral Island, the first few episodes were treated to Japan's view of New York, and it looks just as you would expect from Japan. The very first person Yu meets in New York City steals all of his stuff. Yu almost gets hit by a car. And nearly everything is covered with random graffiti. As a side note, all of New York is covered in Yas tags, which is how director Yoshikazu Yasuhiko signs all of his artwork. That aside, some of the other graffiti makes me think at least one person must have really hated working on this show. For a kids show, there is a lot of real danger going on here in Giant Gorg. Yu and company spend most of the show running away from assassins and thugs that are trying to kill them with real guns, and even though this series takes 4 episodes to even meet the robot in the title, well, I didn't mind one bit with all the action, explosions, and gunfights going on. Our next main character is a man who just goes by the name Captain. An acquaintance of Dr. Wave's, he's our Rex Bannon for this show, and he only has 2 very simple rules. Number 1, never waste a bullet, and number 2, make every single shot count. It's his job to get our characters safely onto the mysterious Austral Island, and you do not want to get on this man's bad side. Rounding out the cast, we're also introduced to a few islanders who help guide Yu and company through the island, as well as some gangsters, thugs, and the young head of the Guile Corporation who's trying to prove himself to his grandfather. And last but not least, there's the man himself, the unstoppable robot, Giant Gorg. He kicks, he punches, he tackles, and even has a kung fu karate chop. Dog may be man's best friend, but boy's best friend is robot. Gorg is a pretty laid-back robot most of the time, but man oh man, if there's one thing you don't want to do, it's get Gorg mad. If Armor Hunter Mellow Link was about man winning against mechs, well, Giant Gorg is the complete opposite, with some of the most one-sided fights against a robot I have ever seen. Gorg is a robot in the classic sense. He can't fly, he doesn't have any lasers, and he's just about as slow as robots get. But God help you if you get in his way. In short, Gorg is awesome. Giant Gorg's characters are mostly secondary to the bigger theme of mankind's powerlessness in the face of Gorg and his origins, and if you're looking for heavy character development or insight into these people's thoughts, well, you're not really gonna find much of that here until you get towards the end. Giant Gorg doesn't take itself too seriously, and it's content with slowly building towards the big reveal of Gorg's origins as the cast gets strung along for the ride. Giant Gorg may also be the most American anime I've ever seen, not just in terms of themes and locations, but in how it presents itself and where it comes from. It embraces many cliches of the Saturday morning matinees of old, and each episode is filled with gunfights, tanks, scuba diving frogmen, giant robots of course, gangsters, bizarre alien monsters, government espionage, and above all else, good old-fashioned 1980s violence. You name it, Giant Gorg has it. It's also unlike the majority of all modern anime, not for what it does do, but for what it doesn't do. It's never bogged down by the complications most mecha shows seem to have these days. There's no cringeworthy fan service, there's no slow panning shots or zoom-ins to save money, and the animation, while not spectacular in any one shot, is extremely fluid and fun to watch. It's constantly moving, and never once in its entire 26-episode run did I notice a single piece of reused animation. That really says volumes about how much care and attention was spent on this show. There's also none of that pseudo-intellectual philosophy so many modern mecha shows get caught up in, and the entire show comes off as very sincere and genuine in trying to tell the age-old story of a boy and his robot. If that weren't enough, every episode also ends on an action-packed Batman-style cliffhanger. It's the kind of show that would have been great to watch one Saturday morning with a bowl full of cereal, and Giant Gorg would have fit in just perfectly with other 1980s cartoons in America. I can also swear it turns into Scooby-Doo for like at least a minute. Look at this and tell me this is not Scooby-Doo. Giant Gorg was directed by Yoshikazu Yasuhiko, who did the character designs for the original Mobile Suit Gundam series. Yeah, that Mobile Suit Gundam. Char and Amuro, all Yasuhiko's designs and ideas. Mecha and anime in general owe a lot to Yasuhiko's influence. He also directed the Venus Wars and Crusher Joe movie around this time. Venus Wars, however, didn't do very well, and that was his last role as director for a really long time. Surprisingly enough, 30 years later, he recently returned to direct the Gundam The Origin OVA series. Even though he's pushing 70 years old, you just can't keep a man like Yasuhiko down. Giant Gorg has never been released in America, but Bandai did try to bring it over to the United States in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, Gorg and Leisner were a package deal, and when poor quality masters were all they had available to turn into the DVDs, Sunrise decided it was best not to release Giant Gorg in the US at all. Legend tells of a fully subtitled VHS release of Giant Gorg, back in the VHS tape trading days of the late 80s. That was a time when getting your hands on even popular shows like Zeta Gundam was almost impossible, and every once in a while you hear rumors to that effect. Stories of when the name Gorg was carried on the wind by word of mouth alone. Lucky for us, Discotech recently picked up the rights to Giant Gorg, so after 30 years, America can finally see what the big deal is. Hands down 100%, Giant Gorg is the embodiment of everything mecha anime should be. Great fights, a large cast of likable characters, fluid animation full of action and drama, Gorg beating the absolute bejesus out of everything that stands in his way, and it runs the gamut of almost every cliche imaginable in the action genre without a hint of insincerity, all while playing it completely straight the entire time. I give Giant Gorg 4.5 stars for having one of the best robots of all time, a sense of adventure missing from pretty much all other mecha shows, and telling a damn fun story. It's a classic show full of action, guns, and adventure, and if you had to watch just one show about a kid and his robot, well, you couldn't do much better than Giant Gorg. Tune in next time, the same Gorg time, the same Gorg channel.
今君は一人じゃないさ Believe me, believe you さあ濡れた瞳上げて Believe me 君